Hello, this is Neil from iPaintGirls.com. Please visit the website. The description is in the link for more free tutorials. Alright, so, a lot of people have been requesting this on a steady basis. I don't know why I haven't done it yet, and that is, light and shade. And like I said, I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to do it now. So, there's a lot of concepts to understand, and, there are good books on this topic on light and shade, but I don't know, sometimes the books just don't explain it in the way a video can, or, sometimes people just don't explain it in a way that I think makes sense to them. But so hopefully I can explain it to you in a way that makes sense to you, because it's the way that makes sense to me. There's really not very many tutorials on this topic either, so what we're going to be learning is how to shade the form. And so there's some basic principles I need to go over first before we start actually shading this. And this will apply to color too. If you don't know how to shade in black and white, how to get the 3D form in black and white, with pencil, whatever, you're not going to be able to do it with color. So you need to learn these basic things. And there's some concepts that are kind of boring, but you need to learn them in order for it to start making sense. You need to study them. One thing you have to learn, you ever wonder why do anatomy books have, or books on drawing, have the figures in really primitive forms, like the arm might be like the arm might be like, let's say, kind of an egg shape, and then they might even represent it as this is definitely a 3D form, and then off of that they might have this kind of block shape for the bicep, let's say like this, and then they might have another 3D shape here for the forearm. Right. So anyway, the point is that they represent the form in these primitive 3D shapes. And why do they do that? Because that's something you want to learn. You want to learn the planes of the body. You want to imagine breaking the body down into basic forms, basic shapes, because that'll actually help you when drawing or shading. For example, the hip area. First, imagine you have this kind of shape here for the right. It goes right in here like that, right? Actually, it's right about here. And this line here, the one close to us, the one you really want to pay attention to, because that's where those little bones fall in on. And what this will really help you actually, draw the body to in its 3D form. So then you can imagine you wrap around the fatty tissues and stuff, and then legs, whatever. But what's important here is that there's different shapes in here, right? So you have this kind of shape right here, this kind of part of the abs. And that kind of, forms into this here, like that one, almost like an egg shape there, imagine it. But then you have two other shapes here and here. So you want to imagine you have your egg shape in here, then and it kind of builds onto this one down here. Then you have these kind of shapes here, kind of more abstract, not so bumpy, which then causes this kind of shape here. Would you ever wonder why, people when they shade, they might actually bring those lines out some, depending on what kind of shading they're doing. So it's important to know the body in these shapes, and then you have this kind of shape here, this shape here. These aren't quite like eggs, but they're, they do come out just a little bit, and you can imagine it with lines, so you can imagine the 3D-ness of it as they come out. And then you can kind of imagine this more, all this is kind of more flat planes, but then you have these here, and they kind of have, some, and then this can be like, kind of, comes out a little bit, it might have a highlight right there. So if you imagine the body in these primitive shapes, and then you have, these are kind of spherical, like not spherical, but kind of, they kind of want to keep imagine them keep coming up like that. That we can kind of imagine the full shape, but they're kind of like saggy balloons with not much water in them setting on something. If you want to imagine the 3D shape, it's kind of like half bowls, or almost, or a little bit more than half bowls. Let's see here. The thighs, depending on the angle, really, you want to imagine it, like kind of primitive planes, like you have here, one plane here and one plane there, kind of like a box, like a rectangle will actually work. But you have to imagine that this part of the rectangle, has, and that part of the rectangle also has lines. So you want to kind of imagine it maybe more like a tapered sphere might be easier. So then you can just draw the lines. And remember the highest part, where the highest part of that sphere is at, is out here. That's why I'm drawing it like that. And then it tapers off, and then you have your knee and so forth. So imagine the body like this, and it will really help you when you're shading. So you can imagine this is tapered sphere, so you can have one tapered sphere here, one tapered sphere there, sort of tapered, and then you have here it's kind of an egg shape, sort of. You know, you might want to start with an egg shape, but eventually you'll kind of like this. So you know the darkest part, if there's light's coming from that direction here, it's like that. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to cover. And I know we haven't actually started even shading this character yet, but you have to understand what I'm doing when I begin to shade her. Is you have to understand these principles. This is what I'm thinking about when I'm going to shade her. Is I'm thinking about her 3D form, like kind of a 3D mesh. You can kind of see I'm sort of building a mesh there. But you want to imagine those individual shapes, and that's very important. But first, you want to be able to imagine the body in a 3D form on a macro scale. It's on a larger scale, so you're ignoring details. So instead of the arm, having this bicep piece here, tricep piece back there, like two different spheres, or not spheres, but three-dimensional kind of elongated egg shapes or something. You want to first imagine it as just very basic, like let's say a box for the bicep, and then kind of an egg shape for the forearm, and then maybe a tapered sphere, for the shoulder and then the forearm, something like that. So, and then after you're able to do that, you're able to shade a primitive body like that with primitive planes. Then you can add more detail to your mesh type shape, and change that into, now you have this shape, and then you have this kind of shape back there, and then that shape there, and you want to, oops, damn, I need to get my correct drivers back. And then imagine those three different shapes there, and then that's how you'd be shading. And when you do shade, you shade them as individual shapes, and it'll help your form come out better, your 3D form come out better. Right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next principle I want to cover, since we covered kind of a little bit about form and primitive shapes, is how light hits objects, and hopefully I can finish it with this, and then we'll come back with part 2 and actually start shading her. So imagine we have the light source coming out in this direction for now, and then we have this egg shape, right? So this is from the front. Oops, that's a bad egg. Let's kind of go like, ah, damn you. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to draw these lines so that we can imagine it having 3D form. Okay, so kind of like this, right? Now this line right here is not going to be the most important line, because the way the light's face, this line right here is the most important line. So that line's the most important line, and that line's the most important line, or even a line right about here actually. The reason why is because that's where the light's actually hitting. So the reason why I'm drawing it like this shape is it kind of means that this light, if we were to view this light source, let's see here, it's coming down, obviously, but kind of at an angle. But if we were to view from the top, so this egg and this light source on the top, right? Let's say this is like a spotlight or something, like a flashlight or whatever. From the top, you would have the top of the egg. So let's say that's the top of the egg right there. And then the light source, this light source here, is kind of right about, is right about here from the top. So that's in location. So it's not directly on the side of the egg. It's kind of coming toward us, as you can see. Right, so then where's the light going to hit? So let's take this line right here, and I'm going to translate this line now to a side view. So now we're going to take that line and we're going to view it like this. So it's a side view, right? So this is the same line that's facing us. Now it's from a side view, because if you were to turn it, you would see the side of the egg like that, right? So then you can see the part that's coming closest to us, or the part that's closest outward, is right here, the middle, because of the shape of the egg, right? So that's where the part comes closest to us. Let's say this light source, we move it over here, so now it's like that, and now the light source is literally right on the side, because we're not just moving it, we're moving it, see, right on the side like that, and we're moving it down. So now we're moving it down here, so now the light source is hitting directly on the side of the egg. Then this line becomes the most important line right here, and the light source the highlight would be right there. That's the spot, so it would be right here, and you can see that's the part coming closest to us, and so everything else then we know would be up here would be darkest and darkest, so we know that up there would be darkest and there would be darkest, so you'd have your darkest darks there and there, and then of course as it comes away from the egg you'd have darks there as well, and then your light would be right there on the side. Okay, so that's important to understand. Now let's go back to this light source here. The light's hitting that line, so then it's what part of this line is closest to that light facing down right here? Well, it's right there. So that is where the highlight of the egg will be. And so now you'll have the brighter parts emanating out. So now you'll have the darkest part being all along here. But then you'll have some shadow over there coming like that, and then you have some shadow here, and then your highlight would be right there. And then you'd still have, some light hitting there. Let's say a little light hitting there. So the further away from the light source, the darker it gets. We're dealing with just one light source right now. We're not dealing with reflected light, which would bounce up onto the object. We'll get into that. And so I guess I'm gonna have to talk a little bit more about how light works before we shade her in the next video. Then hopefully in the next video, I'll finish some of the light source, and we can also shade her as well. If this has been helpful so far, please leave a comment, or at least rate the video. It only takes a second to click the thumbs up, and I'd appreciate it. Thank you.